You know, I've always felt a little bad for St. Thomas. He's an apostle of our Lord, a saint of the church. According to pious legend, he was the one who went to India and brought the Christian faith to that land, and even lost his life as a martyr there. And yet, how do we remember him? As doubting Thomas. Exactly. But I mean, put yourself in his shoes, okay? Here, the disciples are behind locked doors, probably because they're afraid what had happened to Jesus would happen to them. And Thomas isn't with them, but Jesus appears among them. And then, when Thomas comes back, they tell him. Now, in all honesty, knowing what you don't know now, what would you think? I mean, would you think they were playing a cruel joke? That they were sharing a mass delusion? Or maybe they got into that fine wine that Jesus had turned for water? I mean, it is pretty hard to believe. And so, today, you know, we have this wonderful lesson, several wonderful lessons. And even though I'm always tempted to preach on the book of Revelation because it's such a crowd pleaser. You know, I want to preach on today's gospel. I want to preach on one main theme, and that is doubt. I want to look at doubt, and I want to ask the question, is doubt the enemy of faith? Is doubt the opposite of faith? Is doubt something that we should try to avoid at all costs in any way possible? And to begin, what I want to do is share a story about someone who is very important in my life. And he told me this story. It's about himself. He grew up in a small town in the deep south. And his family was... They went to the Episcopal Church. They were very active in the Episcopal Church. He did all of the age-appropriate activities and engaged in the age-appropriate ministries. He would go with his friends to other churches, but this was decades ago, a simpler time. He lived in a very homogeneous culture of a small town. And so the ideas he encountered at the Baptist church, the Methodist church, were hardly different at all from what he encountered in the Episcopal church. Well, time goes on. He grows up. He goes to college. He gets a degree. He comes back. He starts working. But he becomes newly active as an adult in his church. And it was no surprise a few years later when he thought he might discern a call to the priesthood. So he goes through all the requisite counseling and gets the blessing of the bishop, and off he goes to seminary. And the first year, my friend said, was wonderful. First year of seminary is studying the Bible, biblical languages, church history, and is really enjoying the unique fellowship of seminary, which is a wonderful thing. But the problem began in his second year. The second year is when you really start digging into theology. And in seminary, the way you dig into theology is you don't just look at items, you don't look at ideas, you tear them apart. You try to look at what they're grounded in. And all of a sudden, John was hearing things he had never heard before. What's more, here, all the people from places not like his hometown, from around the country, even from around the world, who were his classmates, started saying things that were quite different from what he believed. And he was with all these believers. And so, what this did, the first time in his life, really, other Christians were challenging what he believed. You know, not maliciously, but with their own faith. And after a while, he became confused. He didn't know what he believed. He was struggling. He was doubting. And after a little while longer, he didn't know if he believed. And he tried praying, but it seemed that his confusion over what he believed bled over into his prayer life. And he said it was dry as dust. So he knew what he had to do. He was an honorable man. He said he went to the dean. And he told the dean the story, and he figured the dean would say, well, of course you should resign from seminary. We're all people of faith here, and there's no room for doubt in a place like this. But of course that's not what he said. The dean was a wise man whom John later found had dealt with his own doubts. And so he told John, he said, I want you to stay right here. And I want you to wrestle with these ideas. And John protested, they don't make sense to me. I don't understand any of it, and I can't believe any of it right now. But the dean said, stay right here. Stay in this community of faith. And what's more, he said, keep praying. And John protested even more strongly because he said, prayer feels useless. I get no consolation. I get no sense of God's presence. Why should I pray? But the dean said, keep praying. Even if you're going through the motions, just open yourself every day in prayer. And so that's what John did. Now, I met John actually decades after this. He was toward the end of his ministry. But he had had a powerful ministry, and he had a big effect in my own life. And so the question is, what happened to John? Well, let's look at it another way. How do we understand all of the elements of life? How do we understand the things we encounter in our lives, from, how the world works, to how to interact with other people, how to deal with money? Well, we grow up and we get concepts that are appropriate to our intellectual development, right? And as we grow, we discard those. Most of them pretty easily, because there's something better to replace it. But sometimes there are some things, some concepts that are so important to our sense of self, our sense of worth, our sense of faith, that we can't let go of them so easily. And it becomes a real crisis. We suffer real angst, real doubt. And this is what happened to John, and this is what happens to us when we have times of doubt. The way I look at it is this. We have this idea, this concept that's serving us well. We hold on to it. But then another concept comes, and it crashes into it. And there's no way we can reconcile it. And we have this cognitive dissonance, so we can't hold them together, and so they wrestle with each other if we're brave enough to let them. And usually what happens, if we let it, is neither one of those survives. Something new, a third thing comes out of it that's even more life-giving. Brothers and sisters, doubt, when it comes, is not a negative thing. Doubt is often the way God is using us to tell us what we understand is not enough. Your God is too small. I'm bigger than this. And you're just experiencing a little bit of me. But we love our ideas and our understandings, and we don't want to let go of them. But what it's like, it seems to me, it's like swinging from a trapeze, I don't know if it's all that safe feeling up there, but I'm sure it's safer feeling holding on to one of the bars. But eventually you've got to let go, right? And you're spinning through the air, and you're not yet to the next bar. That's doubt. And so what happens when our old religious concepts, our old faith ideas, the way we understand God, the way we understand church, the way we understand our fellow Christians, any of these things, the way we understand Jesus, what happens when those ideas fail us? Well, the key is what the dean said to my friend. Stay in the community and keep working it out. That's what everyone is here for. When you can't believe, they believe for you. And they sustain you. And keep praying, because you know what? You may not feel God being there, But I guarantee you, God is there, working behind the scenes, bringing a new, better understanding out of this wreckage of your old. You know, look at Thomas. The next time they're all together in the upper room with Thomas, Jesus stands among them again. And Jesus says, Thomas, take your finger and put it in the wounds in my hands. And take your hand and put it in the wound in my side. And Thomas's exclamation, his proclamation, is that great statement of faith, my Lord and my God. In other words, Thomas went from an old concept to doubt to a new, deepest understanding of who Jesus is. My prayer for you and me is not that we won't doubt, as hard as doubt can be, but it is that we will be faithful in our doubts, and that we'll hang on to one another. Always hang on to one another, and hang on to God in prayer. And the lesson that Thomas teaches us, the lesson that many people of faith, including my friend John, teach us, is that God will be faithful and give you new life and new faith that will take you further than you ever imagined possible. In Jesus' name.
Amen.